Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome to our first event of the 2025 Fall Residency of the International Writing Program. I think it's actually the first time we've done something before school actually started, so that makes it exceptional. And we're putting this event together courtesy of the Robert F. Ho Family Foundation Global, which for the last 15 years has been sending 1 to 2 writers a year from Hong Kong. And once before we had a separate panel discussion on the subject of the artist as a form of resistance. And today we're going to talk about translating Hong Kong with 4 very distinguished panelists. We have Ching-hang Wang, was born in Hong Kong. In 2021, the Hong Kong Arts Development Council funded the publication of his debut short story collection, Southbound Truck. Writing in a realistic style, he focuses mainly on Hong Kong's new territories west in his work, with the aim of bringing to light how the lower class lives and the roots of their difficulties. His first collection features a teacher, truck driver, detective, masseuse, welder, construction worker, and dock worker. His stories are set in the new territories and beyond, which enable him to examine the complexity of cross-border population movement and the rapid changes the city has seen in recent years. His participation in the Fall Residency is made possible by the Robert H. N. Ho Family Foundation Global. Yuen Yu is a fiction writer, poet, nonfiction writer, the author of the novel Before I, the poetry collection Nowhere Land, and short stories collection The Bestiary. In recent years, she also served as a judge for the Hong Kong Youth Literary Awards in the fiction category. Her work, The Bestiary, was nominated for the Renaissance Award in 2019 in the literature category. Before I is her recent novel, attempting to break through her personal writing patterns and challenge existing local novel conventions in both form and content. She is currently a freelance journalist, writing feature articles and interviews for cultural magazines and online media. Her participation is also made possible by the Robert H. N. Ho Family Foundation Global. And both of their works, the selections of both of their works are on this table here, free for the taking. So pick them up after the reading. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the University of Iowa, Mary King Bradley, who translates from Chinese to English. She's a writer, freelance editor, and the East Asian editor for Books from Taiwan. She received her MFA in literary translation from the University of Iowa in 2016. Her translations of poetry and prose have appeared in the Georgia Review, the Massachusetts Review, Mekong Review, Voice and Verse Poetry Magazine. A personal essay, A Tree Grows in Hong Kong, was featured in Making Space, a collection of writing and art from Cart Noodles Press in 2023. She lives in Hong Kong, and that's where she's flying tomorrow. So we got her just before she has left town. And our moderator, Fion Tse, was born and raised in Hong Kong and translates between English and Chinese, specifically Cantonese and Mandarin. Her writings and translations have been published in Asymptote, Full Stop, and World Literature Today, and she's now an MFA candidate in literary translation at the University of Iowa. Fiona is going to be the moderator. And before we start, I wanted to just leave you some words from one of their predecessors here at the IWP, the wonderful writer Deng Kai-chung, wrote a novel called Atlas, the Archaeology of an Imaginary City, about Hong Kong. And here's how it begins. The miracle of Hong Kong is that it has always been evolving, incorporating elements of both Chinese and foreign cultures, accommodating influxes of immigrants from the Chinese mainland in different historical periods, and nevertheless maintaining a distinctive cultural identity. This city of immigrants is also a city of locals. Yet the founding of Hong Kong is a historical accident. Had the British not chosen to occupy the barren northern coast of the island in 1841 and set out to make it a colony, Hong Kong as we know it today would not have existed. There is no need for its present inhabitants to express gratitude for that, but we have to admit to the fact that Hong Kong was invented. It was one of the marvelous inventions in human history. Hong Kong has been a work of fiction from its very beginning. There are enough fictitious Hong Kongs circulating around the world. It doesn't matter so much how real or false these fictions are, but how they are made up. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about here this afternoon. Fion, over to you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And the first question I have on my translator is actually very much related to that quote. Is what does it mean to be a Hong Kong writer? Yuen, so lives primarily in Hong Kong, while Ching-hang, you emigrated to Aberdeen, Scotland. And now you're both in Iowa City for this IWP residency program. How does being or not being in Hong Kong change the way you write about the city? Hello everyone, I'm Lana and I'm Hong Kong. Um, I'm so it's okay. I'm so glad to be here with Ching-hang, Larry and Fion to share about the Hong Kong literature and translation. And it's probably the earliest activity for IWP, and that's why I prepared this sharing on my flight and also during my jet lag. Yeah, that's why I have to hold my notes in my hand. In Cantonese, it's called Baozi. It's like a cheap sheet. Yeah. So I just want to express myself more clearly. Yes, I apologize for that. And about the questions, what does it mean to be a Hong Kong writer? And actually, living in Hong Kong right now means seeing this huge change up close. Because past few years I haven't felt the urge to live like other how. Instead, I feel that I can live anywhere because maybe you don't know that a lot of Hong Kong people they just try to live their home country for some political reasons. And at this moment, I don't have that kind of mind. I don't have that concept in my mind. I feel I can live anywhere. And actually, the change in Hong Kong has affected me and those around me a lot. That living there has helped me grow stronger and more patient. And I think the writing becomes more true to itself. You just need to keep the writing about your life and your thoughts. After 2019, and my writing changed because of the huge protests in Hong Kong, which shook many people's lives. And I can say that I start focusing on character dealing with personal struggle and social change in Hong Kong's intensive cultural and political settings. And I also try to start a new style, like scientific or dystopian short story. And I never thought that I write like this before. My writing was super personal, almost like bearing my soul. And in the past, I want my writing to dig deep, to push so close it scared me, like writing about death by going into hell, or about women's pain as a cycle that keeps coming back. But nowadays I changed. I think I'm less stubborn and more open to new way of writing. Now I try to find the right distance in my writing. Maybe because my woods and others' woods are still growing, and I don't want to stare at them. There is still pain to process. I think the best distance that we connect with others and see them clearly, without focusing on one sore spot. Um, yes, that's the one.
Thank you for having me. Today I will be talking about design. Here I will have the interest in statement areas. And that's all right. I want to tell you a story that I'm going on. 我哋喺個教咗俾我哋都唔得嘅嘛，個船喺一個，然後我哋嚟因為問下大家明，佢之前人哋話，懷抱你，於是咧佢就游水過咗，然後有時佢就游水過咗，然後自己一個活咗喺度。
My maternal grandfather was born lived in a fishing village in the 60s, and he actually drove his fishing boat all the way to Hong Kong. And my maternal grandmother, who's from the Zhongshan area, was a spiritual mystic. She married my grandfather, and both of them came to Hong Kong together. My paternal grandfather on my father's side, in his village during the Cultural Revolution, people were made to kneel on glass. And so he fled to Hong Kong. And my maternal grandmother, she came to Hong Kong alone in the middle of dark night without telling anyone. So it was within one night she had just left without telling anyone and went to Hong Kong.
所以香港可以話係一個逃難嘅城市。
So in that sense, Hong Kong is a city of escape, flight, and refuge.
所以我哋做嘅係一個文學培養嘅環境。
Hong Kong's identity as a colonial city was shaped in large part by its the rejection of literature by the colonial government. And the goal of the British government was to remove Hong Kong from literature. So the way that Chinese is taught in schools, everyone takes the IELTS for English testing. And the way Chinese is taught in schools in Hong Kong is very similar to the way IELTS is taught in how people are examining the IELTS. It's split into reading, listening, speaking, and writing, the same way you acquire a second language. And I have seen documents from the colonial government period that has said that the goal of this policy is to remove Hong Kong from its literary roots and culture.
所以如果你問我香港嘅作家係咩身份先睇個睇章，咁睇章有一個我嘅典型就係，佢通常係作家嘅身份係睇佢哋小説，作家會係一個殘疾者嘅身份去出現。喺香港，我哋作家某程度上係用嗰種殘疾去呈現自己嘅健康嘅一個過程。
Earlier there was mention of authors of Hydra. Often in his novels, he writes about authors as almost disabled characters who have these disabilities to their way of life and way of writing. And in Hong Kong, writers are often that same way. We are using writing as a way to heal ourselves.
咁而更加吊詭嘅就係我哋唔單止係被識字，當脫離之後，我哋又會一個新嘅政權。我同語人呢度就係正式香港同主流同激進化嘅其中，我哋大概用咗我哋整個嘅潮場去爭取民主，然後最後亦都放棄咗民主。咁我哋首先我哋出世嘅時候已經要自然嘅事，到我哋步入中年，我哋要自己第一次。咁而文學可能係一個互相嘅一種方式，都係一種令到自己再一變質嘅一種方式。
Hong Kong was a colonized place that has not been able to step away from that colonization. Yuen and I grew up in a generation where we had to fight for democracy. This was at the height of the pro-democratic, political movement, and we spent our youth fighting for a post-colonial existence, and it failed. And now we're spending our middle-aged, years. Our middle-aged years, the middle period of our lives, the same thing. And perhaps literature is a way for us to heal ourselves. Mary, is there anything?
First of all, I'm saying thank you, Fion, for being a moderator and helping to interpret. That is not at all an easy thing to do. And we discussed how we could do this in a way that was least stressful for my mind. Actually, I'm glad that you chose to tell that story in Cantonese, because I think that it's very valuable to hear the spoken language. We had a really interesting conversation a little earlier about language, specifically Cantonese and identity, and what that means to be a Hong Konger. Because as some of you may or may not know, when a Hong Kong writer writes, they may or may not incorporate elements of the language that they use in their everyday lives. So, written Chinese is a more standardized form often, which is why somebody like me can translate a Hong Kong writer. I've lived in Hong Kong now for almost a decade, but I'm still struggling with learning Cantonese and learning Mandarin first. Now they both stink, but that's life. So what's written on the page is often, I think it's fair to say that, it's always an interpretation of thoughts, but it's not necessarily as they would speak it if they were speaking to you, right? It's very much like a standardized form. And what I really love about Lala's writing is that, and some other Hong Kong writers too, is they try to resist some of that by incorporating things, which does have a written form, it's just not standardized. So I was telling you a story earlier when I first got to Hong Kong and I was standing with my now husband in a movie theater looking at a movie advertisement. And I got through about half of the tagline and then I got to a bunch of characters that I thought I ought to know. And I had no idea what they meant. And I kind of realized what's going on there. And I thought, oh, well, that's movies. So, you know, it is possible to capture that in writing, but not every writer does that. I also wanted to share with you, Michelle Chan Schmidt, who is an up and coming emerging translator, who's also from Scotland, and has translated London. She's a friend, we got to know each other this past year. And I wanted to share with you what she said about London's writing. Which brings us to Hong Kong, where Lan lives and works and writes, where I sit about this now. Lan has told me that she often wonders what Hong Kong literature means, that she does not strictly wish to represent Hong Kong, that she sees herself as a writer from Hong Kong rather than a spokesperson for the city. This search for meaning amid our roots animates most of the Hong Kong authors I know, especially in light of the 2019 protests, which scrambled the public border between truth and untruth in modes we're still grappling with. The thing with the scrambling is that the borders shift even as we try and fail to cross them. I think I shared that because I think that was beautifully put. Ching-hang and I have talked about the fact that his own writing gives me more, it doesn't necessarily incorporate Cantonese, but it does very much incorporate rights, which I'm going to get that short of that.
We're actually gonna get to that right now. So as the quote from Michelle might encapsulate for a lot of us, Hong Kong is a place that has changed a lot in recent years and continues to change every day. And something I'd really like to ask both of you is how have your relationships to Hong Kong as a place changed? And what kind of a place would you describe it as? What are its borders, its boundaries?
我都係由一個故事開始講先。我以前喺間公司度做嘅，咁間公司一個好高嘅商業大廈，咁而家商業大廈喺個廣場去用嘅。咁我哋嘅建築大部分係用混凝土建築，咁然後經過50年嘅壽命就結束會重建，所以我哋嘅城市係不停插位同重建。咁然後我見住一層一層嘅插位，然後一層一層增嘅。我見個城市好似一棵樹咁，經常被斬嘅，就唔係重新生，好似樹咁。
I'll start once again by telling a story. I worked in an office building that overlooked a industrial building. The near construction site. And so sorry. And a lot of the buildings in Hong Kong are made with concrete, which has a lifespan of about 50 years. So we were constantly watching these buildings get torn down and rebuilt, torn down and rebuilt over and over again. And watching it, I felt as though I was watching a tree cut down and regrow over and over again.
以前嗰陣時，我亦都係告訴你第二個話俾你聽第二個故事，就係我屋企附近有一棟樓叫紅樓。咁呢棟樓咧就係當時中國革命嘅一個起源地之一啦。咁但係佢係冇保育，即係冇好似一啲外國嘅歷史建築咁重視。同時咧，本身佢係一個慶祝中國革命嘅地方，但係到而家都已經到近視嘅。所以除咗查案之外，我哋嘅政府或者政權係希望我哋記住太多歷史。
And another story for you all. I live next to a building known as the Red House or the Red Building, and it is one of the origin places of the Chinese the Revolution. And it was also a place to celebrate this history, to remember this history. And in recent years, the government has put a stop to these celebrations and remembrance of history. And it's their hope that we forget.
所以對於我嚟講，就係作為一個作家，就係我其中一樣嘢，點解我咁仔細去寫一個地方，就係因為我哋呢個城市好似每一個人都患上失憶症，我哋經常會忘記好多嘢。作為一個作家，可能做咗一個責任，講地方咁嘅就係我唯有用我嘅文字去講俾大家聽，有乜嘢係曾經存在過，有乜嘢係發生過。
So as an author, the reason I write about things in so much detail is because each one of us seems to have some sort of amnesia when it comes to history. And it's my hope that I can use my writing, my words, to remind people of the histories that have come before us, and to restore these memories.
同埋作為第三代香港人，地方咁係一個好自然嘅成功，就因為佢嘅移民咗咁多個香港已經係個好似生命嘅一部分，我已經係內在呢個地方。
And as a third generation Hong Konger, it's the place is part of who I am. It's in my bones, in my blood, and it lives within me. I have to switch to my native language because I don't prepare the notes. 頭先正行佢提到一啲關於保育嘅問題，我哋都喺啱啱嘅討論嗰陣時，都令我諗起有一段時間咁就去一個原居民嘅村落，大概有400年歷史嘅原居民村落嗰度去做考察啊，去做訪問咁樣啦。咁嗰度係一個好極端嘅保育嘅一個冇辦法被保育嘅一個狀態啦。咁嗰度係香港歷史最悠久嘅原居民村落，但係個問題係喺入邊嘅人，佢哋就過緊一個佢哋嘅設施啊、建築啊，就經歷一個咁多年嚟一路都冇去被維修啊、維修或者去建設嘅一個城市。咁喺入邊嗰度人住，其實就好似去翻我哋父輩咁樣嗰種生活環境，即係外面嗰啲渠口咁就好臭啊，啲沖水嘅設施又唔係好健全咁樣啦。咁甚至乎佢哋天花板嗰啲水好似個頭嗰度。咁但係點解佢哋冇辦法去重建或者有一個政府介入保育咧？就係因為佢圍住咗嘅係一啲地產項嘅一啲業權，咁就令到佢哋冇辦法可以突破呢一個政府冇辦法可以穿過呢個私人嘅業權去做任何嘢。Earlier, Ching-hang mentioned heritage preservation, and I also have a story to tell. I visited a village in Hong Kong a while back for some research, and this village has been around for 400 years. It's one of the oldest existing villages in Hong Kong, and it's really poorly preserved. The people living there are living like our ancestors did. Even the sewage system is completely old. The ceilings fall down sometimes, and yet the reason that no heritage preservation or no work has been done on these villages is because the land around it has been bought up by a bunch of housing development companies. 所以其實香港嘅保育問題好複雜，包括佢哋嘅地產嘅權利嘅情況啦，同埋本身香港嘅保育嘅政策其實係先有啲問題嘅，佢係必須要嗰個建築物係納入嗰個保育嘅即係幫佢評咗級之後先可以保育咯。所以喺呢件事上面，你就見到啲村民係好想離開呢個地方，去過一個更加現代化嘅生活，或者其實佢哋係想佢哋想離開呢個地方，但係個問題係佢哋冇辦法，因為政府 或者嗰個地產商只可以提供到嘅一啲回報，只係可能係只係買到個露台或者買到一個廁所，咁而佢哋會提翻啊自己住嘅時候，佢哋可以換到一個3層樓嘅一個住宅，咁佢哋就會可以於一啲地產發展商佢哋提出個項目，所以其實喺香港去保育一個地方，其實係一個好多角力同埋好多啲力喺背後嘅嘢。So in Hong Kong, the system of heritage preservation is pretty flawed, and that's part of the reason why this is happening. In Hong Kong, you have to have a building has to be given a certain grade of heritage and historical importance of heritage preservation needs before any work can be done on it. And so despite a lot of villagers living in this village wanting to lead a different life outside the village, it's very difficult for them to do so. Because back in the colonial period, the government would provide a sort of house for house policy where villagers could sell part of their land and get money to buy land or have that be exchanged for land outside of the village. And now the money they receive in this house for house policy is enough to perhaps get a bathroom or a balcony in exchange for their entire house. And so the question of heritage preservation in Hong Kong is incredibly complicated and complex. So as a journalist, I think Hong Kong is more than just a colonial part or its political or economic roles that attract attention. To me, Hong Kong has a strong tie to Song Dynasty culture, and many original residents came from during that time, or even the Colon Wall city shows Song era transit. And also as a coastal area, Hong Kong has a rich water culture with both people or fishermen creating its wandering, flowing city vibe like Ching-hang's grandfather. And it also has a traditional rural culture linked to the land, where both indigenous inhabitants and non-indigenous villagers connect to their ancient land in different ways, like what we mentioned, that the old ancient village. And they are also roots of Hong Kong, not just colonial history, I think. And that's why I think Hong Kong's culture is complex, diverse, and also changing. And that's why, as a writer, I don't want to look down what Hong Kong is. And different people can show their own version of Hong Kong. And we define it each time when we talk about it. Lately, the government has tried to control how we tell the Hong Kong story. And for me, the real Hong Kong story is its openness, diversity, and variety. It doesn't just have one side. And in that vein, I think we can all think a little about how those different communities, different areas of Hong Kong talk to each other, communicate, and how they all sort of come together in the space that we call Hong Kong. And so I'd like to turn this question to Zen Kang. In an interview with key articles, he said for you, literature is a form of communication across people, place, even time. In your writing, who do you hope to communicate with? And what do you hope comes of communication?
大家講一個故事就係我盡我 I don't want to tell you a story. 我曾經係一個中學老師，第一堂中文咧，我就同所有嘅同學，你哋每一個都係作家，咁而咁係好多都係問題青年，咁佢哋識嘅字都唔多，但係呢個係我嘅信念嘅，唔單止我係作家，每一個人都係作家。正如今日我喺酒店樓下同一個叫 Michael 嘅老熟者傾偈，佢講咗好多我哋都有趣嘅事。咁我陣間都會送本書俾佢。
I'll start by telling another story. I used to be a secondary school teacher, and a secondary school in Hong Kong is the equivalent of a middle of high school in the US. And the class I was teaching, the first day of class, I walked in and I told them, "You're all writers." And this class I was teaching were students who were labeled as problem youths. So they didn't have a wide range of extensive vocabulary or a great sort of education, but this is my belief. And it's just like how today, as I was walking out of my hotel, I had a conversation with a man named Michael, an unhoused person, and he shared a lot of his story with me, and I'm going to give to the book later today as well.
呢個故事嘅結局就係我俾人炒嘅，因為我講得太多。
And the conclusion of the story is that I was fired because I said too many things.
咁我再講第二個故事就係我曾經係一個燒焊工人，咁就我都係因為講太多嘢，所以你間會派公司人就叫我你唔好出賣。咁於是我喺冇做記者之後，我用咗3個月時間學習燒焊。我記得其中一幕好深刻就係，因為我係燒焊最渣嗰個，即係用我哋嘅説法就係烤包機。咁其中一個比較擅長嘅行業，你入咗我間金屬嘅，即係用一間小房間去捉住我嘅手，然後教我點樣去運行嗰度啊，點樣去將啲金屬用合埋一齊。我喺嗰刻，我覺得我喺度跳緊舞，我覺得我哋喺度創作緊藝術。
And I have another story for everyone. I used to be a welder, and this is because I used to work at a media company, and I was also fired because of these little things. And so after I was no longer a reporter, no longer a journalist, I went and became a welder. And as a welder, I was also not very good at it, and I was, I would say, bottom class. And later on, I had a friend who went to work in a different company, and he taught me a lot of techniques, for example, how to fire certain things. And as he was showing me these techniques, it felt like we were engaged in a dance together.
我覺得創作或者本身都咗一樣好重要嘅嘢，就係嗰種溝通就你首先要知道你係同埋你同所有嘅人都係一樣，咁然後你只不過係將文字寫出嚟嘅，但係其實呢個世界每一個人都有佢嘅獨特，佢哋都係作者。
And I think that's the important thing about writing to me is that in this world, everyone is equal. We all have our own experiences. We all have our own sort of ways of being. It's only that writers use the words to write it down, to record these things. But everyone has their own individual thoughts and experiences, and we're all writers. And this next question I have is for Nana. And taking a bit of a darker turn, the characters in Nana's stories are often experiencing deeply unsettling senses of otherness and isolation. And we talked earlier about the sense of perhaps place being not so strong or fragmented in Hong Kong. And often this, in Nana's stories, this is tinged with a threat, or sometimes even with the explicit presence of violence, both interpersonal and systemic.
what draws you to the other, and could you speak a little more about that element of violence in your work?
I want to respond to Ching-hang's, talking about that, can be a writer. I, totally agree with that, because, when I was still very young, like near to 13 years old, I had a strong urge to write. And until now, I still think, I still have that belief that writing and telling story is something deeply human. And anyone can write and explore their who they are. Just they can dive into the moment or relationship or their sense of destiny. I think it is like a touching of the core of the life. There are a lot of fleeting moments there, and what you do is just to catch it. And until now, honestly, I don't think that we 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 don't think that we don't need to get award or praise to be a writer. Until now, I still believe that. Because I think writing for us, the beauty of it is the honesty. Anyone can tell their own story, and by writing it over and over again, and it's like reborn each time when you write. And writing also can help you to find a piece of yourself. It can lift you up, make you feel stronger, or it can bring up fear or heartbreak. I think that is also my original point of or intention of writing, because I was just so naive. I just think I can write and I can be a writer, even though I don't think any uh advantage of it or any award or praise about it. And response and yes, reply response to your question about violence. And I'm curious about that element because I never describe that way for my work. But I try to analyze myself because of the actions. And I think because in my first novel entitled History, I have the one imagination about the world where human and animals start blending together. And these ideas come from seeing the weird and cool or shocking things in everyday life. Like wars nowadays, or like some genocides nowadays, or just closer things like sexual violence, family conflict, or family attack, or even the way we hurt ourselves. It is also so violent. I want to mention that humans are not same as the beast, but I'm interested in where they are similar. They are quite similar. And until to my third book and title Before and I saw even the baby, just maybe several months or just 1 year old, showed their early signs of violence. They might hit themselves and when they are angry or they just enjoy destroying anything. And when they grow up, they just turn the violence outward. They hit father, mother, or their friends. And we are all quietly hurt ourselves. Maybe to follow the world rules, or there may be something inside us
I write about violence, because I can see it in myself. As a woman, often feel different type of violence. Yeah. Either from internalization or just forced on them from outside of the system. So, my early novels were darker, more violence with no focus on hope or happy endings. But now, I think I'm ready to weigh compassion and gentleness into my writing. I think because both my reader and I are searching for it, and we need it, because it is a central human value, and especially we experience a lot of tough times nowadays.
Well, I hear you. I think so. Yeah, I'll just.
So, again, Michelle Schmidt worked with online and translated for her, and it was my great privilege to translate for Ching-hang. I think their stories are quite different from each other. And I think, we're going to move into a more kind of translation portion of the conversation now. But Michelle, when I spoke to her, I told her I was doing this panel with both these authors. She said, "Oh yes, I wanted to do something." So she commented on that Ron is also a poet. Although her poems are generally translated from I think I'm translating. She's a poet of pajamas and the fall of time and birds that free fall from line to line. She makes me feel like I'm reading waterfalls, and translating her feels like writing life. And the first line of Before I novel is into the gossamer steam of late sunlight comes. The language itself is a protagonist of my lecture. And I think this is very true. When we first proposed this, Ching-hang and I had an email exchange, and he raised the question. I love it when my authors engage in conversation. That's how I learn. And he commented that he thinks that he writes correctly. Yeah. He commented that he thinks that he writes in a more slightly more classical Chinese style in terms of flow and punctuation. When I read his writing, I understand what he means, but I also see a modernity, right? And one of the challenges that I think that we face as translators is how do you adjust us to a story, right? In terms of transliterating it from one language into another. Because it's not so easy, right? So we had a conversation specifically about punctuation. And if you look at the original Chinese that's included in your book, and you compare it to my translation, you might notice that I have a lot more periods, full stops, than he does. So I'm also a tutor. I tutor Chinese speakers in English, and we have many conversations about that. And that core little comma in English, Chinese writers ask them to do so much. It just isn't, English just doesn't allow for. So one of the things that I noticed when I was reading Michelle's translations of Lan is how she really tries to embrace the poetry of Lan's writing, and she does that through the punctuation. So whereas Ching-hang's writing is much more realistic, it's much more rooted in social economics and class and everyday experience. And yours is too, but it's very personal. I think yours is personal, but in a different way. Right? It's filtered through more a lens that gives it more distance from his personal experience. So his personal experience informs it, but it's not quite so soul bearing. And so when I read Ching-hang's work, that's what I see in the original, and that's what I want to translate. And so I don't feel the need to be quite so faithful in terms of that little comma.
So segueing us so perfectly into my next question, which is to both Ching-hang and Lan about your experience collaborating with translators. You both worked with two translators, you with Mary and you with Fion Tse. And so I'd really love to know more about that experience working with a translator and reading your work in different language and different, perhaps with different punctuation. What was it like to have this conversation?
可能因為我自己本身係一個語文教師嘅關，即係我會幾常知道嗰個語文如何轉換。因為中文好多時候係一個單音節詞，一個好短嘅句子已經表達到好多。中國好多經典嘅詩歌，只不過係用20個字，然後20個音節都表達咗個詩歌。咁但係英文係好難做呢樣嘢。咁用中文嘅好處就係我哋可以用好短嘅東西，好強節奏去表達好多嘅內容。
So perhaps because I've been a language pedagogue, this is a question that really interests me. In Chinese, we have a very, perhaps, rich, sort of information density in each syllable. In classical Chinese poetry, you have a whole poem written in just 20 syllables, and it can express a rich variety of things, whereas that's quite difficult to achieve in English. And so I've always been curious about how this language transfer happens. And we both forgot.
而第二個問題就係，因為中文嘅寫作係經歷咗一個現代化嘅過程。咁而我就諗就係，我用呢種語去寫作，係咪會經歷過某一種嘅成長過程咧？係受西方咁，尤其是我哋閱讀嘅時候，好多時候都係閱讀一啲由歐洲語言翻嘅作品。於是會當我寫中文嘅時候，我一定要有知我應該點寫呢個句子咧？我點樣去表達自己？
And because the Chinese literature and Chinese language have undergone so many processes of modernization and colonization in Hong Kong, and a lot of the works we read are translated from European or other foreign places, literatures. And so the way we write and read has also been influenced by that. So when I write, I'm always asking myself, how should I express this thought? What methods should I be using to write what I want to say?
我覺得我睇完劇本之後，我覺得以後有盡力去表達中文嗰種短促嘅節奏。
But after I read Mary's translation, I felt that she had really tried to capture the short staccato nature of Chinese literature. And Lana, if you'd like to share about your translation experience as well, that would be wonderful.
其實我收到 Michelle 個 notes 嘅時候，我係好感動嘅，因為其實我哋從來都冇就翻譯嘅問題有啲對話啦。咁其實我唔係好知道佢點樣睇我嘅作品，或者其實佢翻譯嘅過程係點㗎。
我哋嘅交流都好普通嘅，即係我問佢你覺得點啊？咁佢就話我好享受譯啊，好開心啊，你寫得好好啊，即係都係呢啲咁樣嘅對話。所以睇咗個 notes 我自己係好感動，因為佢嘅播可能唔單止一個譯者，而係一個係深入到每一個文字，同埋係一個好愛好文學嘅人。佢亦都帶咗一啲嘅評論者嘅觀點喺佢去處理我嘅文本咯。
When I read Michelle, my translator's note, I was very touched because in our previous conversations, we talked, but not on the topic of translation. Every time we talk about translation or for translation of my work, it has been a back and forth sort of like, how's this been translating my work? Oh, it's great. It's fun. I'm having a really good time. And when I read her note, I was deeply touched by the way she approaches my work. And I'd never asked her before what she thought of my work either. But in her note, she wrote about Michelle is more than a translator. She is a lover of literature. She is a critic. And so when she wrote this note, she approached my work with a critical eye as well and thought about the language, the story, and sort of came at it from a literary critic's perspective as well.
當 Michelle 佢去形容佢喺我啲文字嗰度讀到瀑布嘅時候，我係好驚訝嘅，因為我當初收到佢嘅翻譯嘅時候，我都覺得好似係讀緊一種好似一種水嘅感覺嘅。咁而呢種特性亦都係我嘅創作入面或者我文字入面其中一種特性咯。所以其實佢捉住呢種特性嘅時候，我就覺得個文字係同我好近啦。同埋另一樣嘢就係因為我啲作品就比較即係詩意或者詩化啲，咁其實係一個好大嘅空間去容許個譯者有佢自己嘅創作嘅中間。所以我從來都覺得翻譯係一個兩者去對話嘅過程。所以我就覺得就算同阿 Michelle 喺語言上面冇講好多嘢，但係喺文本翻譯之間，原來我哋已經溝通咗好多嘢咯。
When I heard Michelle, or rather when I saw Michelle describe reading my work like as a waterfall, a flow of water, I was really surprised because this is something that I see as unique about my own work. This is something I try to do in my own practice. And so to see her have replicated that in her translation without us having talked about it explicitly was very surprising to me. And I think that when it comes and even though we don't talk a lot face to face about translation or the process of translating my work, our conversation happens in the translation itself, in the literature, it's text that we exchange.
我哋之前都有討論過，究竟有啲咩會喺翻譯入面失落咗啦。咁我哋嗰陣時，我第一下諗就係因為香港人佢係會用將廣東話擺落去佢嘅創作入邊，即係佢有兩種嘅觸法喺個文本入邊嘅。咁廣東話就係口語啦，咁書面語咁樣啦。咁你就會發現其實翻譯嘅時候呢啲嘢係會失落咗嘅，尤其是係唔單止失落，如果當嗰個廣東話係同一啲水上人講嘅，因為廣東話都有好多唔同嘅俗話，佢講嘅時候都有，咁都會喺翻譯度失落咗。咁而我哋作為作家，將廣東話同埋中文拎埋一齊，其實都係有個原因咯，就係想將呢種咁差異性咁大嘅嘢擺埋一齊，但係亦都會喺翻譯入面會消失咗。
We've also talked about, before this, we talked about the idea of loss in translation, things that are lost in the process of translating a text. And as Hong Kongers, as people from Hong Kong, when we write, we are often putting Cantonese into our work. So Cantonese is a more vernacular language that we speak. And when we write, we have a more literary or perhaps written form of language that we use. And
in Cantonese itself is not a monolithic language either. For example, there are lots of different communities, for example, people who live on the water, fishing communities who speak a different form of Cantonese from other people in Hong Kong. And so when people in Hong Kong speak, it's a blend of all these things, and sometimes these things can be lost in translation as well. Yes.
So I think what I would say about Ching-hang's work that I really respect is that, there's a great deal of specificity of place in his work. If you read the translation of the story, or the Chinese, Chinese, you will see that he refers to very, very specific places in Hong Kong, that are specific even by Hong Kong standards. I mean, if you, I worked with another writer who was also at IWP, Virginia Gang, and we had a conversation one time where she said to me, you know, Mary, there are a lot of Hong Kongers who were kind of born in the Northern Territories, the New Territories, and they grown up there, they gone to school there, and they never go into the city. Like that's their whole life up there. Because you know, maybe it was too expensive to go down, or maybe, you know, there was no reason for them to go down into what we think of as Hong Kong proper, which is Hong Kong Island. If you're not aware of the geography of Hong Kong, there's Hong Kong Island, which is here, and it kind of goes out in concentric circles. So above Hong Kong Island is Kowloon, and then above that is the New Territories, and above that is the mainland. So where I live now, if the British had kept Hong Kong Island, which they could have done, but obviously did not. Where I live now would now be part of mainland China, because they would have to, they couldn't have supported that, they would have to give that back, we're on the board. So what Ching-hang is writing about is the very most northern part of Hong Kong. That would be, I think, a completely alien, different place to many people who live in Hong Kong and spend their whole lives there, which is really yeah. But what is so special about the stories, from my point of view, is how universal they are. It doesn't matter where they're sat. Anybody can read these stories and recognize real human experience that speaks to all of us. And yet at the same time, he's reporting these really specific details of time and place that came open to Hong Kong. And I think that's what makes this book so special. And when I translate that, I want to translate the mood, you know, that he's conveying in these pieces. And I hope I succeeded. I think you said good as those first Thank you. But I also wanted to do honor to the rhythm and flow, right? And I hope that comes to you too. So every Hong Kong writer, I think, has a slightly different approach to this, and has a slightly different voice. But as we were talking earlier, it's the diversity, and all of this is Hong Kong. We were talking earlier too about the importance of memory and remembering the city, but not being stuck in the past. And I think that's also something that we should continue to look for in Hong Kong writers, and support them in, because there's definitely, you know, people and organizations that are trying to erase that. And so that's how we can help support Hong Kong literature.
Thank you, Mary. I think that's a lovely note to wrap up our portion of the panel on, and I would love to open it up to the floor to the audience for any questions that you may have for Ching-hang, Mary, or Lana. And as you are thinking about these questions, as you are letting this seep in and marinate, I'd like to start us off with one sort of audience question. A question that I'm really interested in personally, but is not explicitly part of transit in Hong Kong. Which is about the various forms of writing that both of you engage in. As we both mentioned, they both work in different professions. Nana is a poet, a journalist, Ching-hang is working a wide number of professions, and while they journalism, teaching. And so I'm really interested in not only what drives you to write, but what is at the heart of your practice, perhaps. If there is one practice and one part, if that exists at all, what is it?
我轉咁多講咗係冇事有同埋係因為唔知點解，即係香港近年嘅變化太大咁。如果你做一個誠實嘅人嘅話，你好容易會被轉工。
So my change of professions was not voluntary per se, but Hong Kong's changed so much that perhaps if you are to live an honest life as an honest person, you would be forced into the same position.
And I want to talk about a story about Coco. Coco is here. Hello. Yes, because yesterday we have picnic together, and I heard that Coco began writing his novel about the tribe and hometown, his home village, because he just want to keep alive his Asian culture, myth, and language of his ancestors' fishing village through his writing. And I think this drive to write is so powerful because it's just like linked to his roots and also the essence of his soul. And he also told me about his village, which is like I feel like a flame or fire growing in the lake, and it was really moving because you can also see the same fire or flame from his eyes and face. Yes, and I think everyone has a strong drive to write, and most of them that's deeply linked to their roots and also their soul. For me, I think poetry is my first language of writing. What is the meaning of poetry? I cannot define it because when I was still very young, I don't know poem. But I think the self-dialogue is like a kind of poem. And I start from that kind of I start from that starting point, just talking to yourself with poetry that none of others know it, just you know about what you're talking about. And let me check the sheets. Sorry. Yes, that's why I start to write from myself first. Those were my truest inner thoughts. So I began write about myself, the women around me, my family, my even people that I know or I'm curious to know. All those died by my inner voice. Ching-hang, who writes about society with realistic style, and he cares about different peoples around him, especially the working class, different people. And I focus on personal, intimate, and unspoken experience. And all those things is so abstract, like desire, fear, violence, life and death. And I think I'm drawn to the blurry line between what is real and what is not. And all those mysteries, they are hiding parts of life that we are hard to put into the world. And because I have a background of anthropology, and there is some aspect from the anthropology. I think it is really close to my perspective of writing, and it's come from Weaver's roles. And he thinks anthropology is the study of conflict, beliefs, custom, and system. It really like poetry, literature, or histology, to find a deeper truth that hard to fully describe what is why we have to use contrasting or conflicting words or images. And he believed that, the anthropologists believe that metaphors are the core of how we think, getting us close to the reality or authenticity. I think, yes, we just put a lot of conflicting image, idea, and words together in order to close to the reality and authenticity. Yeah, it is quite ridiculous, but it is the writing or literature itself.
That's very beautiful. And I would like to open it up for real now to the audience. And see, if anyone has a question, can you raise your hand and I'll pass you the mic. Maybe you just get a question. Or yeah, I could also just sort of put the question. But I think I'm really, we covered it all. You have no questions.
I can ask you a question, but you think about the situation and our own system in regard to teaching.
The question was, thank you. What do you think of the situation in our own American school systems with regards to teaching foreign language? Foreign language, yeah.
That's my lovely, by the way. Thanks, Mom. Well, I think it's interesting knowing that about, I mean, I feel it's a big loss, I've already lost that isn't more available.
Yes, I think they should all be learning Chinese.
With respect to it. Or not, or something that I don't know.
Well, I'm gonna change the question just a little bit. I think that learning a second, a third, fourth language is a really valuable thing. It opens us up to a different way of seeing the world and about things. And what I would add to that is that for me, translation has been a gift because it has allowed me to engage with somebody else's thoughts in a really intimate way. And also in some cases, I think their brains a little better when they're open to that. And I think that I would describe translation as something of a gateway drug. You know, it opens up all of these other possibilities. It gets you curious about things. You want more. And it makes you think about the stories we tell, the stories, it makes me think about the stories that I'd like to tell. And how I would do that. So in some ways, translation for me has been an opportunity to kind of explore the nuts and bolts of writing, make something a really good story. And I couldn't have done any of that if I hadn't learned another language. So I don't think we all need to be perfect in the languages we speak, but it gives us a richness and diversity that maybe wouldn't exist otherwise. And that's the only problem with that, of course, is that there's already so much to read probably in our own languages. And then you have to open that up to others. I will say that I am very slow at reading Chinese. Very slow. So I would like to read more of it than I do. But that's another reason why I'm grateful for translation, is that it gives me an opportunity to be slow and really engage with it at a sentence level of their essay punctuation.
I just tell you.
Okay.
Oh, man. This may be, I mean, I know this is, we've already had so much of this conversation, but what other writers do you feel, your work is in conversation with, like whether in Hong Kong or elsewhere? And, yeah, just curious about like sort of that growing branches or network. Yeah, who would you put your conversation with?
I'm just gonna repeat the question for the recording. So Tom's question was, who do you feel like your writing is in conversation with? So what writers perhaps are you influenced by? Are you thinking about talking to as you write? Whether in Hong Kong or elsewhere.
本我本書出版之後，我係自己買翻自己本書啦，然後寄去巴基斯坦同印度啲大學，咁然後想同當地嘅我係學生聽，但係結果係好似冇乜回覆咁樣。
I remember when my book was first published, I actually bought copies of them and sent them over to universities, the departments of Sinophone studies in India and Pakistan, hoping to start conversations with the scholars there, but there wasn't much of a response.
因為作為一個香港人喺中國説話嘅，有出國報者，我會經常覺得點解我哋好似對於其他隔離嘅地方，我哋需要用英文嚟理解佢？例如我認識印尼嘅作家，我要透過文化，然後先至了解到一作家。咁我係好渴望其他亞洲嘅國家去一齊對話，因為我哋嘅命運相似。好似我頭先同印尼作家講完1960年嘅印尼大屠殺，我哋經歷好多相似嘅內容，但係我哋好似我哋之間嘅距離好遠。
As someone who speaks Chinese as a mother tongue, I'm always curious about why, in order to communicate with countries so close to where we're writing from, we have to use English to do that. For example, I learned about an Indonesian author, an Indonesian book through the Booker Prize. And I was just talking to an Indonesian author the other day about the 1960 Indonesian genocide, and we our fates and our lives are so similar and so intertwined, yet we feel so distant from each other.
我今年有一個決定，就係我要開始學多啲亞洲嘅文化。喺今年我就將一間清真寺去同利比亞同埋敍利亞嘅作家去傾偈、去交流，然後我開始咗學阿拉伯。I can speak English. So this year I start to learn more language this year. I go to a mosque during Europe, at off the people around from India, from Syria. And finally, it start to talk with me in our, sure, I can speak some like Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would like to do more conversation with our issue writers. Yeah, the first step is I need to learn their language.
最近咧，我都成日帶住一本作家香港作家嘅書啦，叫《中力影》。咁佢就寫散文嘅，我帶住佢生而為人啦，同埋玫瑰與豬咁樣。跟住我嚟愛荷華唯一帶嘅都係呢兩本書，香港作家。
Recently, I've been carrying with me some books by Hong Kong writer Ching-hang and Yuen. And I'm not going to translate the titles of these books because they haven't been translated yet, and I want to leave that open. But these were the only two books I brought with me to Iowa.
因為喺書入邊咧，其實佢已經寫作已經去到成60幾歲，佢接近70歲啦。其實佢都一路發緊一個問題咯，就係我點解寫，我為何寫，我為咗邊個寫咁樣？呢條問題我諗好多作家都會不斷啦，喺自己唔同經歷或者階段係咁問呢個問題。就算你出版幾多書，或者你幾成功，或者你寫咗幾多嘢好都好，你都會問呢個問題。
Because in her books, in her writing practice, she's been writing up until the age of 60, maybe 70, and she's always asked the question, how do I write and why do I write? And I think no matter how many accolades you get as an author, how many books you publish, this is a question that will continue to come back to you again and again.
喺個書入邊，佢係不斷透過疑問去達到肯定，不斷透過對自己嘅懷疑去達到肯定。
In the books, she asks questions, she reaches sort of answer or conclusion, and through that doubt, she reaches an answer to her questions.
佢覺得佢自己係答緊一條問題，就係我是誰。
She feels like she's asking or answering the question, who am I?
呢一個問題係一種好深入嘅部分，佢係大過日常生活。
This question is a huge part of our life, and it's bigger, greater than our everyday lives.
所以佢最後好簡單咁樣答咗，其實寫作嚟講就係佢活着同埋成為佢自己嘅方式。所以其實好簡單呢條問題。
And in the end, she answers the question and says that writing is how she lives and how she comes into existence. And so it's really a very simple question or a simple answer.
So I would like to talk about my favorite writer, the contribution. So I think I start. In 1968, Ching-hang was invited to IWP, this program. But before their staff, he was arrested because he read the capital with his father and his friend. At the same time, church how there have been talking about the president of the country. Thank you so much. We have no time to again, he was invited to join school lecture and he kept there's the recognition. Yeah, changing is my favorite right there. Because it's so special because it's a massive 15 minutes in time. Sure. Is was founded in Taiwan, but it can still produce in Hong Kong. Sure, we have deep nature to Hong Kong and duration can be and it inspired so much. Yeah, I love this show. If we want, we can every because we see your family in this version. Yeah,
So I think what's really exciting about IWP, the presence of so many excellent Hong Kong writers here is that it finally kind of moves us beyond some of the writers that I think have stood out as being Hong Kong. But well, Susie comes to mind. I love Susie, I love her writing, but Susie wrote for a different Hong Kong. And so when you look at the list at the beginning of the book here for the Fellowship for Outstanding Hong Kong Writers, 2025, you see a lot of things here. A lot of these writers have been translated or are being translated, and I would encourage you to look for their work. And discover and experience themselves through their writing what Hong Kong literature is. Thank you.
And I might just add that it is a practice of the University of Iowa Library to acquire all of the books by all of the IWP writers. So all of your predecessors are in our library, both in the original language and in what translations exist. So I want to thank, what a fabulous panel, so thoughtful, so many good stories. And particularly Fion, you have handled the translation and moderation with elegance and style. So the 2025 Fall Residency is off to a good start, and we'll have lots of public events as the days go along. Thank you so much.